Eric, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you back.
Good to see you, man. Good to be here.
Yeah. So we got a lot on the agenda today. We got a lot to knock out, and you're working on a lot of exciting projects these days. So I'm excited to dive into those with you. We did do another podcast before, so like there's no reason to do an introduction or anything. If you want to know more about Eric, I'll provide all the links. But I figured that we just dive right into some of the stuff that you've got in the works because it's very exciting stuff. It's very, very large visions for these projects, very the largest of visions. You can't get larger than this. So I thought we'd dive into the Phoenix culture from whatever angle naturally arises now. Um, and so the Phoenix culture is, if you want to explain it a little bit, that would be great. What is a DAO? How does the Phoenix culture work? Just whatever is arising for you in terms of what's front of your mind in terms of the Phoenix culture these days.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to talk to a few people about this now that I've been uh, releasing it more publicly, and I've kind of landed on two starting points that I think give a kind of solid introduction. The first is that these are both kind of points or open questions. The first is this argument that culture is the driving force of how everything looks right now. Like another way to say it is the world is exactly the way it is because the culture allows it and enables it to be that way or wills it to be that way. And as you're seeing it, and there are a lot of small examples of this, like the entire pronoun stuff, you know,
Yeah,
groups of people reclaiming how they're named
yeah,
is the culture demanding or willing something, and the culture is actually changing. The world is actually changing as a result of that. Same thing with energy systems, same thing with the crypto movement. The culture is willing a different way of fundamental economics, and the world is changing as a result of that. So the first point is like everything we have, all the good and all the bad, right? All the crises that we're up against, I would argue, are generated by the cultural force beneath them. So that's one point. I think there's many good arguments, and there are a lot of people beyond myself who articulate very well the fact that actually the way modern and global culture is right now probably can't continue as it is.
yeah.
Because if we keep up business and culture as usual, we are going to hit a brick wall moving very quickly. So there's this argument of, okay, culture needs to shift, and as a result the world and the way we act in it needs to shift. First point. The second kind of example I've been using is the Tesla example, Tesla cars. Um, I've also talked about this in the kind of angry activist argument where
Yeah,
activists are normally, I think their intentions are good, but the problem with a lot of modern activism is solutions are never presented. It's
yeah.
only saying like, you're doing this wrong, I don't like this needs to stop. And I mean, if you got your way with that, you'd end up in just this negative space, just a lack of anything rather than a movement forward towards anything. And so Tesla, rightly so, coming up against the fossil fuel industry, the transportation industry, a big driver of significant problems. Instead of just being like, okay, these guys suck, this needs to change, they actually just made something else that was so beautiful, so accessible, so compelling that people of their own intrinsic motivation came are currently transitioning over to that way. And in that way, they're addressing the problem by making and presenting the more beautiful solution. So the open question then becomes, well, if we need to do that on a cultural level, what does the more beautiful, accessible, life affirming culture actually look like? And
Mm,
that open question of like, what does a culture that isn't going to blow itself up look like? What does a culture that doesn't have a rampant and growing mental health and suicide epidemic look like? And Phoenix culture has been the attempt to address that and start to bring it into the world. So actually taking, yeah, how do you make a culture that lifts people up, that stewards the collective and the commons really well, um, and that can help actually present this new home base? This is also the game B kind of signifier, the open question of like, okay, current game cannot continue. It was kind of fun while we did it, but okay, we got to find something else. And yeah, so it's just an earnest and urgent exploration of, all right, well, let's just build the more beautiful alternative that is in itself just so compelling that people of their own motivation and desire gravitate towards it. And I
Yeah.
mean, you can see this, you can be an individual example of this. Like, there are some people where just through the way they are, through their way of being, you're like, oh, I want what they have. But what is it? What is it that they're doing? Like, what is it that they have that is so compelling? And yeah, I think our task at hand is to create the cultural, the big collective version of that, where it's like, oh, my quality of life is going to go up. I'm going to feel a lot more meaning. I'm going to feel more connected to people. I can actually live in harmony with the natural world, and I don't have to like something very something very scary about the kind of Mars, second world, second Earth space. It feels like a lot of people have just given the fuck up on planet Earth as we know it, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, the game. It's not a lost hope yet. It's
It's
not a
not.
lost hope
It's
yet, and
not.
the world is fucking beautiful. We just have to be able to come into right relationship with it.
Mm.
And so all of these questions, and I mean, yeah, I'm starting to actually present what I think can be answers and options and ways of being that do this, and Phoenix culture is the kind of container for that.
Wow, that was beautiful. Um, so yeah, so what was coming up was one. There was so much coming up, but the the goal that you're going for isn't tangible, and I think that's where I think I've struggled, and I think many people maybe when trying to wrap their mind around Phoenix culture is it's like it's very intangible. And so what was coming up is how is this different from like a just a visionary ideal that doesn't put it like we're going to create a more beautiful world and we're going to help everyone ground themselves and inhabit a different state of being. Like it's like this mission is abundant. Everyone you meet has the mission to create a more beautiful world and to help people inhabit different states of being. And like the theory behind like, and I think you've articulated it a little bit more precisely than I've heard with like the generative frequency and like all of these things. But what's coming up is like I think you're on the leading edge of like how, and I think that's what you kind of pointed to at the end there is you have a couple ideas about how to do that. But perhaps DAOs, decentralized ways of relating to each other, as like an external manifestation of that, and then also all of these different specific, because you have specific things and techniques and ways through which we can actually bring this forth, rather than just saying I'm going to change your state of being and then the world, this culture is going to be better, you know.
Yes. Yeah. There there I think two or three points to this. The first little kind of side note is I definitely do not think that the people who actually believe a more beautiful world is possible is the majority.
You don't
I
think
think
so?
that's a super important point. Like,
Ah.
I think a lot of people have straight given up, or the gravity of the direction we're headed has not fully sunk into their bones yet. Like, this stuff needs to change. It needs to change quite quickly because, my God, this week when we're speaking, uh, the west coast of Canada set back-to-back record temperatures recorded ever. Back-to-back
Mm.
days. Like, it broke the previous record 2 days in a row at
What?
like 50 degrees Celsius. Like, it's Like, and I mean, this is early days. This is almost pre-early days, right?
Yeah.
The the earth is vast and the changes are heavy. But you're absolutely right about I think this is the task that anyone who does feel this is actually being summoned to do, which is, what does it look like? Like, yeah, that's cool talk, man. You're painting some nice pictures with your words, but like, where the fuck do I see this in the world?
Mm.
One of the examples I like, and this is actually the thing that I think got Jordan Peterson to some early fame, his notion of cleaning your room. Because if you go to a therapist, particularly for depression, if you're seriously depressed, one of the things they'll actually ask you is like, what does your room look like? And often for people who are really struggling, it's often a mess. It's an absolute mess. It's because the external environment is a reflection. It's an absolute reflection of your inner state. And so if you're just messy and you don't give a fuck, like if your internal world is chaotic and hopeless, yeah, your room's going to look that way too. Right? Like, so there's this is also why I argue that like it's actually the internal that is that brings about the external. This is also why I landed on the cymatic example, the generative frequency,
Yeah.
because again, you just got to Google pictures of that, right? You run a certain tone, a certain frequency through a plate of water and color, and without fail, it generates these different physical patterns.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the question is that I've been contemplating a lot is, so the external influences the internal. It's like the ontological design thing. The external, our tools influence us, and then we influence our tools. And it's like this process. There's no like separation between the two. There, it's always going. And so the process is, what do we do? Do we focus on the internal? Like, how do we know when to do the internal stuff and then the external stuff? When to build a decentralized organization, a new economic system, a new way of governance, or if we focus on our own internal evolutionary process. And like, you wrote a recent article on hedonic engineering, which I think covers this very, very well. But it's like, what I'm sensing is that what I've noticed I didn't realize in my life for a while, and the huge shift was that no one's going to give you a map. Everyone will try to give you maps, but none of those maps will truly work for you because that's someone else's map. That's not your map. And so like we need to draw our own maps. And I think what I see with the Phoenix culture is our mission isn't to tell people what to do. It's to show people how to figure out what to do for themselves, internally, externally. And that's what you're talking about, clean your room. It's like, how do I figure out within myself what types of internal practices to work on, what the internal domain is, what to focus on, and then also what to do. When do I focus external? That I feel like that's a very pertinent question that is not being addressed, and I think you're beginning to address it.
yep, yeah, 100%. This is an extremely important point. I mean, I think the argument is just you figure out what you need to work on by engaging deeply in the world and trying to actually show up. Because I mean, I think there's a point here that is an important foundation of no one actually has an answer on how to do this because we've never done it. Like the things we're being tasked to do literally have not been created. Like it just has not been created. We have never once created a collective way of being at this scale that does not destroy everything around us. Like we're so immensely powerful. This is the Schmachtenberger line of, okay, we got the power of God's thing down, the Anthropocene, like human generated earth change now does more than any of the natural systems change. But we have not done the kind of love and wisdom and skillfulness of God's yet. And that is the task at hand. There's also an individual frame of this. This is essentially what psychedelic integration is. You have an experience, you have perhaps several important moments, insights, whatever it is. But I mean, that just shows you stuff. That's just a conceptual knowing, or it can be an embodied knowing. But then how do you bring that into the world? Into the world. And I think this has been the kind of two two dances or the two patterns of Phoenix culture, which is how do you give people the tools they need to steward their own process? And then how do you give them the actual spaces and tools and technologies they need to start building the new stuff?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
like, yeah, one last thing. Like I've been Yeah, we'll definitely double click on this more. I've been diving into a lot of the DAO stuff because I do think it's one of the potential tools that we'll need. The ability for small groups to quickly form, fund themselves, decide what to do with that, and then go do it in the world. Like
Mm.
really at a much faster feedback loop than surfacing things through a top-down funnel, having the need go all the way up, decisions, and then come all the way back down to be decided. Like we need to get over that. But like my God, it's in being in that space and watching some of the interactions, like Jesus Christ, it's amazing how quickly people will default back into no, just do what I say. Like an
Mm.
immediate reflex into traditional top-down structure, or just being extremely triggered, acting out of just raw emotion, and again doing all the like logical fallacies, like ad hominem attacks, just like, well, you were an asshole, you didn't let me do my thing. It's like, wow. This was also actually part of the origin of the Phoenix culture stuff, which is like we need everyone, or as many people who are willing as possible, to actually start, building and playing the new game. But very few of us can even show up at the table without getting
Ah.
really upset and really triggered. So there was this recognition of like, holy crap, there's actually a bunch of, we need to make the spaces for the internal process as well.
Yeah.
And you're 100% right. Like there's no room for anyone just saying, "Oh, you just got to do it this way," because there are a lot of reasons that argument falls apart. Most of which is you're unique. The thing you need right now, and even the spaces you need to show up in right now, are entirely different. So it is just giving people, it's like technologies of sovereignty, basically. Here are some tools
Yeah.
that might be able to help you. It's now your task. And yeah, we can share good ideas. We can share best practices of like, these really helped me with A, B, and C. Like, if you're getting emotionally triggered, there's some practices that can help with that way more than others. If you're having trouble holding complexity individually or as a group, there are
Mm.
practices best suited for that, right? So it does become this process of, can you identify when you're unable to show up for whatever reason, address that, but then actually also be willing to come back in as an individual node in a much bigger network and contribute. It's like a chair, right? The chair is only functional as the whole thing, but I mean, a three-legged chair is not in any sense functional. Like the individual unit just cannot collapse. It's literally the foundation, but the individual is not the point as well, right? It's actually the thing that groups of individuals can do. Because no individual can build a refrigerator, right? If you just put someone in a forest and was like, make a refrigerator, like it's not going to happen. There's so like a refrigerators are a collective intelligence effort, right? And all of all of humanity is. And I mean, certainly anything that we actually need to make and use to go through this transition, definitely not coming from an individual, but the individual is an essential component. So it is this balance of, yeah, inner work, outer expression, individual sovereignty, collective sovereignty. You can't separate them. They're both absolutely essential.
Yeah. And I noticed as I was approaching this conversation that I'm still clinging on to these linear way. I'm still like trying to, which one do we do first? It's so ingrained in us where it's like, it's so hard to actually like let go enough to be able to see, oh, these are all co-arising together. And you literally cannot understand this if you cling on to this linear way of seeing things. And it requires this truly different way of seeing things. And what was coming up for me, and as you were speaking about all this stuff, is one, we could bounce in a million different directions, but I think there was the point on the ecology of practices. And so one thing that I sense speaking with people in this space and personally in my own life is I don't even know what's out there. I don't even know what practices, like, I think there's the one mission, the goal that I think you're trying to bring forth through Phoenix culture is, all right, create all the foundations of practices, the technologies, the tools, the courses, teaching people how to grow, like do this aspect of their life or this aspect of their life to really like evolve in these different areas. But where I'm at is like, I don't even know what the areas are and what practices are in them, you know? So how can I like create a whole, and so it's like, how do we create one, how do we first recognize what the map is? How do we first create a map of our internal dimensions? Because we have maps of everything external, just about, it seems like. Not everything, obviously, but then the internal, it's like you can't map it, but it helps to have a map, right? You can't truly map it, but it would help to be like, all right, and this is what you wrote in your last newsletter, was like, there's the emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical. And then here are all the practices that help with this and help with the individual blocks. Here are specific blocks and triggers and traumas you can have in each of these different areas. Here are specific practices to approach all these different areas. But then that same layout could also be categorized in this way with 5 different names and different categories. There's no one set category. And yeah, it just seems so complex, but so exciting at the same time. And there was another thing that was arising about the DAOs and about, yeah, that's what it was. You were talking, I was speaking with someone else who has been contributing to seeds, which you have also said you've been very interested in these days. And the same thing arose. We were speaking about seeds and this decentralized organization that's actually running right now, and there's people contributing to it. And this person I was speaking with said the same exact thing. Everyone is like figuring out how to create systems for people to interact with each other and for information to flow, for communication, for if no one is telling you to do anything, then how are you going to make sure everything gets done that needs to get done, and that it's not just chaos? And that's what you said. These systems haven't been created before. They're literally arising as we're speaking, and we're figuring them out as we're speaking. And so one, it feels like, yeah, we need to develop emotional capacities for like, oh, this person has this sort of emotional development and that's why they're acting this way. And like, we need to steward people towards like higher emotional, mental, spiritual development and all of this stuff in order to interact with each other effectively within these organizations too, you know, because if we don't internally develop, then the DAO is just going to be a reflection of our own lack of internal development. And something I've been leaning really heavily on, and this may like be able to wrap it up, and then you may be able to speak on this, is the creative evolutionary process. I've been loving this idea lately. What you can, there's all this content, there's DAOs, there's the internal, there's the generative frequency. Like this, on one level, this is the frequency, but on another context, this is the content. And like, what is the fundamental process through which the collective develops, through which the individual develops, and through which all of this is like tetra rising at the same time, you know? And it's like the creative evolutionary process. It's the process of feel into what needs to be done, or think, or strategize, test, refine, iterate, start over again. And it's like, I've been noticing that if every single moment of every day, or if every single day I just keep that in mind, and I consistently just, my one intention is not what I do, but how can I best do this creative evolutionary process with whatever is happening, is very powerful. So I'm curious what came up during that.
Yeah, I mean, the DAO stuff has been I think it's one of the most potent spaces for all of this stuff to come in. You know, we made the case of like you identify what you need to do by engaging in the world. And my God, these are a really good testing ground because wow, let's do a few points. Can you actually act from intrinsic motivation? This is a huge one. This is an absolutely huge one because you're not going to get fired.
Yeah.
You're not going to
Yeah.
get reprimanded,
Yeah.
right? And actually, I think it's highly confronting for people how much of everything they do is done out of a fear-based mechanism. My
Mm.
boss is going to be mad, my teammates are going to shame me, and like that just doesn't fly here. And so my God, actually recognizing, coming to terms with the fact, like that's one of the things you could notice where it's like, wow, actually I can't sit down and do really high quality work when it's just done out of my own love. And damn, that is something you can immediately take and put into your own individual process. Like, holy
Mm.
shit, I need to become more playful. I need to do things that I actually deeply care about. Another example of this is, are you able, when a group of people, however big, maybe two people, maybe five, maybe 50, maybe 200, all think something, can you actually, in good faith and eloquently say, I completely disagree with this. I think this is extremely wrong.
Mm.
Because I mean, if you don't, if you sense something off and you don't share that, well, the group is now just entirely absorbed in groupthink. And actually you might have been surfacing the most important thing they needed to hear. But if you don't have the fortitude, the strength of character to be that one dissonant voice in the group, it'll never surface. And so again, noticing that where it's like, I'm actually unwilling to create friction in this group right now. That is another thing that can just immediately go back to your own inner work where it's like, okay, I need the core confidence in what I think and what I feel and how I act. Um, yeah. And I mean, it's not the only environment, but the DAO stuff is exceptional at surfacing that,
Mm.
absolutely exceptional at surfacing that. And I mean, like there's a lot of talk, I guess maybe not a lot, but there are many people looking at like what does a teal organization look like, right? The collective version of tier 2.
Mm.
And I mean, it's easy to gloss over the fact that teal would be comprised entirely of yellow individuals, right? Like those two.
Mm.
It always goes back between the individual and the collective, and it's like, yo, you have to be like fucking solid to be able to contribute to this. And that's not keeping you at arm's length. That's actually an invitation. That's an invitation to level the fuck up so that you can show up really fully to this stuff. The other thing with the DAO stuff, like to me, it's an example. Quite frankly, it's an experiment, right? Like this stuff is just forming, but it's an experiment of like, okay, the people who are ready at some level to start doing this, they will need systems and tools and technologies. What does that look like? That might be a step in the right direction there. Like that could actually be an option. I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah. That's interesting. I actually haven't thought about that before. To contribute to a teal organization, you have to be a teal first yourself. And how do you define that? That's very tricky because it's like, how, if you're in a decentralized environment, how do you tell someone that they can't, how do you determine whether someone is going to contribute or not based on, because there's like a judgment call. Who makes that judgment? How do you collectively make that judgment? How are like all of that stuff? It's all very tricky. And yeah, what has been exciting me most about the DAOs has been what you surfaced, acting from intrinsic motivation. The DAO in my eyes seems like this is an incubator to see if people can. It's like, do you want to act and do the thing that you enjoy doing most in the world? Do you want to figure that out and do only that and contribute that to the specific to different DAOs? And it seems like a DAO is like a lot of the the internal stuff around an exciting career has been surfacing for decades. It's like, here's how you enjoy your life, here's how you create a life of passion, here's how like all the internal stuff is well trodden, but the external stuff is just now catching up. It's like, oh, you can do that through this decentralized structure which is arising within the last 2 years. Like you can actually use, that's like the external. I feel like that could be like a way of describing it is like an external surfacing of this internal drive that we've had for a couple of decades of like, do follow your passion, live a life of purpose. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, this is what we were just speaking to, right? What does it look like? Like you feel it inside of you. You're coming from that place, but now it's like grounded in the world. Like ground it in the world. What does this stuff actually look like? And yeah, people are actually starting to do that. And yeah, the DAO stuff is a huge piece for just collective sovereignty. I just found this one that is actually, again, group of people coming together. They fund themselves, and they're actually just funding scientific research. Like it's just a collective that's funding scientists. And there's a really powerful example here of like what the potential can actually be. And it's the line is like, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Like just because something has not been studied doesn't mean it's ineffective. It literally only means it hasn't been studied. And like a real example of this is, well, of course we have so much science done around pharmacology and pharmaceutical interventions to common illnesses. It actually does not mean that natural allopathic remedies aren't effective in doing that. It means there's no science proving that or disproving that. And I mean, until recently, the opportunity to get that stuff studied was entirely gatekept by research institutes that had funding. But now it's just like, okay, we're just going to get some funds together and pay for this ourselves.
Yeah.
Like it's extremely, extremely significant. Like the ability to just do that. And there's another way this comes up for the inner work. It's like, just because you have an idea, just because you have an opinion doesn't mean it's going to be accepted. Like you also have to be able to take extreme feedback. Like the DAO that's been stewarding seeds, like you have to make a proposal for the work you're wanting to do in order to be paid for it. And it's entirely possible that the collective intelligence is actually like, I don't see the need for that right now. Like I don't want to use our funds in that direction. And the way it's been framed that I really love is like, well, if I vote no on this and it doesn't pass, it's not a no, get out. It's a try again. Like sense into the need of what this collective is currently lacking and fill that. So it's not just it's like anyone can join, but it doesn't mean that everything gets passed. And this is the whole point about disagreeing as well. Like if you see something where it's actually like, this isn't serving us, the compensation package is way off, I don't want the person actually running this because I don't think they're equipped enough, like just vote no. But can you actually do that? Like, do you have the fortitude to be like, I actually voted no on this and this is why? And there's like that will, yeah, between giving harsh feedback, receiving harsh feedback, being told no, like my God, these are fundamental things that people will take into their own individual work and process. And it's just, how quickly can you close that feedback loop of showing back into the world and then taking it as material for yourself?
That is the creative evolutionary process.
Exactly. I keep forgetting this one point, and it always comes back when you talk.
I'll give you a sec.
There's a lot of frustration, at least I've personally experienced, and I've seen in many others showing up to this. There's a kind of frustration of like, why are we having to figure this stuff out? Like, why do I have to figure out how to get paid for the work I'm doing? Why do we have to figure out how to vote on our projects? I mean, Because again, if you go to a traditional company, organization, government, they've got that shit sorted, right? That stuff's
Mhm.
already solved. But again, like these are the things that we're being tasked with to reinvent and reorganize, because we've seen the world as it is right now and the state of modern culture is the way it is because all of those systems are set up the way they are.
Mm.
So there is just a lot of a very basic level of stuff that we need to reinvent and refigure out. Like John Vervaeke brings this up, or at least this is where I first found it, this idea of psychotechnologies. Like the idea that graph paper, like the Cartesian coordinates, like X,
Mhm.
Y, that had to be created. That's an invention. It's not in the world. There's no graph paper in the world. That was a creation.
Yeah.
Numeracy, like the idea of numbers itself, was created. It was created. It was invented. And the things, I agree with this argument. I'd love to hear criticisms, but I think the things that we're being tasked with creating and making right now are on that level. That level. Like, what does the graph paper version of collective organization look like? What
Mm.
does the numeracy version of living in harmony with nature while still giving people a quality of life that they love actually look like? Like, this isn't just like, here's a breathing technique you can do to calm down stress. Like, this is foundational, like fundamental fabric of reality inventions that need to be made here. And Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke brought in this idea as well of like a meta psychotechnology. Like, what is the tool that we actually even use to figure out what tools we need to build? Like, how do you actually sense into what is most necessary to be made right now? And again, you can already see the abstractness, the complexity, the challenge of actually doing this stuff. And so, yeah, you immediately come back into, my God, I've got to be able to hold long term sustained complexity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got to be able to like arrive deeply in a conversation and contribute the signal I have, and also like be able to surface from what comes up in the group discussion, so that we might actually move ourselves in the direction of finding out what that is. And then it becomes a whole other process of, once you know, you have to build it, right? And
Mm.
man, like it's no small feat, but there are people up to the task. This is what I mean about the DAO stuff. Like, find the people willing to play that game, willing to operate at that level, get together with them, bring your best, and yeah, I have faith. Like, I have confidence that we can do it. But I mean, no small task, but you're not here at this time in human history to play it small.
Yeah. And that's exciting. It's what excites me. It's like, I don't want to just play the game that's already been invented. And I feel like I'm not adding anything new. There's no novelty there. And like, when I think about complexity and all of these different things, it's like exciting. I life force energy is like coming. I'm like, yes, I want to like solve these problems, because I actually feel like I'm interacting and changing a system in a fundamental way. I'm not just in the system doing whatever it already is doing and just perpetuating what's already in existence. And you've spoken about this in the past as well, but like, something that's super exciting for me these days is we've been operating in this one like metaphysical like paradigm. It's like everything is physical, all this stuff. That's what's been running for like, I don't know, 1,000 years plus. It's been a while now. And what's so exciting is that as you're speaking, and if people are listening to this, like, you're speaking about, yeah, we're like these meta psychotechnologies. These aren't just operating in this one metaphysical dimension. We're
Yeah.
not only tasked with changing the structure of the physical world and doing these tasks that help us change our neurochemistry and change how we feel. They're actually like working in all of these different contexts, this different ontological context, these different it's not just like, here's the one context of the game and let's figure out how to play this game the best. It's like, no, we have to navigate the complexity of thousands of different contexts, thousands of different metaphysical ways of experiencing the world, whether it's physical, non-dual, like these like the subtle, energetic, emotional, like there's all these different, completely different lenses and ways to view our experience right now, and it's on so many different levels, and it's just like, oh, this is so complex. Where do I want to contribute? And so to like to what you were saying, like a meta psychotechnology, it's not just like, all right, what part of this do I want to do? It's like, what part of this multi-dimensional, like thousands of like, there's like thousands of holons all interacting with each other, and like there's this massive thing, and I'm sure there are like graphics that kind of like show this to light, describe this better than I am right now, but it's like this, so like it's always flowing. There's always different dimensions in which we can interact with. And it's not just like, I want to change the physical thing here. It's like, no, I'm actually going to change the fundamental way in which someone views the world. They're not going to view the world as material anymore after they do this practice that I'm creating this technology for. And I think how that,
so good.
yeah. And I think how that goes into the DAO stuff. And what I'm realizing is we're changing the fundamental, we're experimenting and twisting the knobs on the fundamental aim of the game itself, right? And
Exactly.
you're talking about seeds or these DAOs, and it's like, what does the collective intelligence want to spend its money on? And how this came up for me was like, right now, pretty much every business that has been started is bottom line only. That's like the one fundamental like theme through every business that is started in a non-decentralized way, in a centralized hierarchical way. It's like, all right, we have this great mission. We're going to make a more beautiful world. But after bottom line, that's like tertiary, bottom line is always primary. And what was coming up for me when you're talking about seeds, it's like, the money is no longer the bottom line here. Now it's like, well, you can be successful and still unhappy. Like, it's not money, it's like, well, what do we want? Let's figure out what we want first. We actually want to create a different metaphysical, ontological experience for the individual. All right, that's the goal. The money is like, all right, this will make us more money, but that's not our goal. This is our goal. Our goal is actually this thing. And so the collective intelligence is going to push us towards this thing rather than just the money. And I think that could be a super powerful shift. You might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're immediately inviting in the recognition of like, this is why this stuff is so, it's not separated, right? This is the ontological design thing. The way you design your financial system impacts how people act, how they view the world, how they view the value of it. Like, it just is so deeply intertwined. And like there is a point here of like this is what I mentioned at the beginning. Like, this stuff isn't happening just from some like anarchistic, like, I hate the way everything is set up, it all sucks, let's just tear it down just because it's awful. But when you're like, another way of saying this is you should honor the wisdom and traditions that have sustained things thus far, right? But when you start investigating that, it's like, damn, there's very few things that we've done recently that are actually worth continuing. At least in the way that they're set up. At least in the way that they're set up. Again, this is that process of actually letting this stuff like sink into your bones of like, look, if this stuff continues, like, the whole human game is probably going to end. Like, you actually have to really deeply feel that. And then again, it comes out to, well, what are you going to do about that? Like, what are you actually going to do? And one of the things your complexity point brought up in me is like, looking at that can be extremely overwhelming. It's like, holy shit, there's actually just so much going on. There's a framing that I've been appreciating recently of the answer is actually really simple, which is do the thing that you are intrinsically motivated to do.
Yeah,
This also comes with a level of actually, this is again the ontology stuff. Like, do you fundamentally trust the wisdom of the human organism or not? Because I mean, modern science definitely doesn't, sees it as primitive and stupid. And Christianity definitely fucking doesn't, sees it as like the vehicle for sin and base
Yeah.
desire.
Yeah.
But I mean, the human organism is deeply, deeply wise. It's the most advanced technology we have access to. And just even this open question, like I would argue that if people acted solely from intrinsic motivation, many of the things that exist right now would just not. They would just not exist. Like a billion companies would stop existing because again, most people are only there because they've been forced into an economic system that they have to pay to survive. They're afraid of getting fired by their boss, and even the people who created and steward the companies are completely just chained to investors. So actually, all
Mm.
their drive just becomes satisfying, shareholder demand and stakeholder fiduciary duty. Like if people actually only acted from intrinsic motivation, things would immediately look a lot different.
Yeah.
Immediately. This is also why the inner stuff is absolutely inseparable. This is a video I want to record, which is like there's a term in psychology called the dark triad traits. They're like the three like vicious forces. They're just things that are not great to optimize for. They're psychopathy, like lack of emotion, willing to manipulate people, Machiavellianism, which is essentially just boiled down to by any means necessary. Like the end always justifies the means, and narcissism, complete self-absorption. And you'll actually notice that probably the three dominant industries we have, media, business, and
Yeah.
industry, optimize, literally optimize and reward extreme character dispositions in each of those three. Like the
Mm.
entire media Hollywood industry rewards and validates and supports narcissism. Like arguably the people who are most obsessed with themselves and their own benefit rise to the top of that industry. Business at large and commerce like rewards psychopathy. Like I'm not emotional for you as my employee because if I have to make more profits, I'm just going to cut you. I don't give a shit about your family. Like you're just numbers. Your numbers on the spreadsheet. You're not pulling your weight. You're done. Right. It's also how people rise to the top of political ladders. Right. Just a fucking whatever means necessary.
Yeah.
And then industry, like industry at large, often promotes, rewards, weaves into the DNA Machiavellianism. Like, okay, we need to make t-shirts by whatever means necessary. We'll dump toxic paints and shit into rivers because the end always justifies the means.
Mm.
And it's like that's an internal thing. These are internal psychological dispositions, but they ripple out so dramatically into the collective that you can't separate this stuff. And I mean, it goes even further to your point of just how people view reality. Like if you actually accept the dominant scientific materialist paradigm, like you're just a random marble bouncing around through forces with random neurochemical firings, walking a couple decades towards the inevitable eternal blackness that is death. And like, why would I be motivated to do anything in that? how
Yeah.
can how can you actually be motivated to do anything in that? And so yeah, you know, just care and love just entirely go out the window. So it is, yeah, we always come back to this because it's entirely central. Like you can't do systems change without internal change. You can't do really powerful internal, at least lasting internal shifts without external change.
Mm.
Like the actual very origin seed of the entire Phoenix culture stuff was a center, just a little place people could go to in between like intense transformational retreat plant medicine work and the normal world. So they could
Mm.
have some time to like ground the experiences. Because what I see more and more as I do more of this work is like people can have the most amazing life-changing experiences and then they just get thrust immediately back into the old system that generated all the things that they were working to heal in the first
Mm,
place. And so it becomes this stupid hamster wheel of just corroding yourself in a system that does not optimize for human flourishing or life flourishing at all, and coming back and healing that and taking that upon yourself. I mean, what if this is also the open ended question? What does a culture look like? What does a world look like where people don't need to go back and just be inevitably thrust back down to this lower point, but are rather actually lifted up? I mean, none of our systems organized for that.
none of them. And the only way they will is if we change on an individual level, and then they will follow that. Something came up for me around, yeah, there's something really good here around, if we think that only that which can be rationally validated is real, then there is no meaning, there is no wonder, there is no curiosity, there is no passion, there is nothing that matters arises out of this rational worldview. Nothing, again, it's like, yeah, I'm living in this meaningless world that only that which I'm thinking is real, only that which is material is real, that can be proven and like written down on a piece of paper is real. Therefore, yeah, I can just do whatever I want. And it's like, you, when we ask like, what are we creating, what is the culture we're creating, we can't get a good answer if we remain in the mind. We can't get a good answer if we're like, all right, let's strategize about this, let's get everyone in a room, let's strategize, what do we want? If there's nothing other than just mental faculties going, then we're always going to end up at these Machiavellian, these three dark traits, because there is no other ontological and like metaphysical way of understanding what culture we want to create. And so it seems like what I've been contemplating a lot these days is, how do you help someone understand that if they're so in that paradigm? And what I've been arising at is, maybe you can give them what they already know, the mind, but kind of use it to point to something else. I think Eisenstein has done this really well. I think a lot of systems theory is doing this really well. It's like, no, everything is interdependent. You are not isolated. See, look at these mental frameworks where everything is interdependent, and you can start showing that, like, oh, like some things are like the concept of an emergent property of a whole, like that actually kind of like, it like points at something else. It's like the finger pointing at the moon, it's like, that is actually like what is an emergent property? It's like love, beauty, meaning, purpose. That is an emergent property of these things. You can't get those by just breaking everything down and rationalizing it and writing on a piece of paper. And so I think that's a good starting point. What culture do we want to create? It's like, well, first, let's make sure that we're not operating only on the level of mind and on rationality in the materialist paradigm. Let's first make sure that we understand the territory of what we can create. That's what's coming up.
Yeah, man, nothing you truly value or deeply want is tangible. Yeah. This is I mean, this is kind of the entire argument of why the movement away from religion as a source of meaning is actually deeply troublesome. It's deeply troublesome. It's not to say organized religion is fantastic across the board, but the need that it served is foundational and fundamental.
Yes.
And in the absence of God as this transcendent source of meaning and purpose, yeah, we've just funneled in money or the economy or GDP as, like, these things are literally deified. Like, they're treated like God. Technology is straight up treated like God right now.
Mm-hmm.
It is a weak substitution to fill the hole, because at a conscious or unconscious level, people recognize that there's a void there right now, and it has to be filled. It absolutely has to be filled. I mean, this is the exact same example of like cleaning your room. Like, because the opposite example, if someone who is operating out of love and beauty and grace and wisdom is like their environment, the way they treat their relationships mirrors that. Like this is again why the generative frequency thing is so just foundational for me. Because actually, like the external world is downstream. It's a byproduct of where you're coming from. And I mean, yeah, if you are coming from just beauty and grace and love, damn, your world looks very beautiful as a result. And I don't know how much other people would agree with this, but I'm coming more and more to this fact of like you can't change anyone. You just cannot change anyone.
Mm,
People will change exactly when they're ready or when they give themselves permission.
yeah.
And this is actually why, like, over time, I've been starting to use that Tesla example where it's like you actually have to create something that is just so beautiful that from their own volition, from their own decision and choice, they're like, I want to do that. I want to do that thing. Because if you're sitting over here and you're like, everything you're doing sucks, you need to change everything. Actually, people will just double down. They'll double down and be like,
Yeah.
who the fuck are you to tell me that, bro? Like, I'm not, no, like, screw you. And you get this defiant, like, angry child of just like, well, I'm just going to keep doing it because you said not to. And it's just not going to fly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I do think there's a way. And again, our task is to actually like ground it in the world, like build this place that people from their own damn volition and sovereignty be like, that is the world I want. That is the world. That is the feeling. That is the way of being that I want.
Mm, yeah, so much good stuff. I've noticed that too. I never knew why. You articulated it very well, but I always had this hunch that like what is activism accomplishing, And I sense that in politics too. It's like, okay, one side may or may not have more progressive ideals, but the fact that you're telling the other side that it's wrong is also like fueling the fire. And so like you're really not accomplishing anything. And no, that's amazing. The Tesla example is like the solution to that. It's like, how do you live in teal in stage yellow and second tier? How do you like transcend the need to think you're better than everyone else? It's like, well, rather than spending all your time judging, just create something else. And so you spoke about how religion served this core need, right? There was this core, it's meaning, it's providing us meaning in our lives. And although the vast majority of the way religion has been practiced and why I feel like there's this resistance against it on a cultural level, Western cultural level, and like that the whole atheist movement, the whole like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, like all these people, it's like religion is limited. And so let's throw it in the trash. And it's like, it's limited. So how can we transform it and take that? And I think you articulated that really well. The core value is that it provides meaning. So if we throw it in the trash, we no longer have meaning. And so it's like, yes, it's very limited. So how can we transform it into a way where we still get meaning, but we don't, all the limitations of literal interpretation, man in the sky, like all of these like stuff, we don't need to keep those, but we can still keep the meaning. And I think that's what I'm really
Yep.
excited about with Phoenix culture and with all the stuff we're doing. Is like, we need meaning. How do we create the structures and the technologies and the tools for people to create meaning repeatably? How can we repeatedly give people tools to create meaning in their lives? That is like the religion. That is how religion will transform, And I went really deep. Ken Wilber talks about this a lot. He talks about how there's different stages of development. Religion is on this very low stage right now, like 75%, like the majority of people that are in this religious state. But religion is so ingrained. It's like family trauma, you know, it's like it's going to get passed down from generation to generation. So like if your parents were in this religion, it's not likely that you're just going to say, nope, I don't want to be in this religion anymore, I'm going to do my own thing. Like that's unrealistic to think. It's super unrealistic to think that everyone should just trash it, you know. So it's like, how do we create meaning and tools for meaning, showing people that you can use these tools no matter what religion you're in. Your religion can support these different ways of creating meaning. And I think you wrote about that a little bit. I'm curious. I bet you have some thoughts on like the new religion, the new religion being an ecology of practices, or what does the new religion look like?
Yeah, this is beautiful because we can weave in like 2 or 3 things here that are extremely foundational. There's definitely a distinction between like religion as an idea and organized religion as the way it comes up in the world. Uh, so we've made the case so far of the necessity of that internal state rippling out into the world. We've actually also spoken about that almost everything that's meaningful to people, and arguably the way we need to start coming into the systems is an internal frequency. It's an internal state. What does a group of people coming together to cultivate that experience in themselves and the tools and techniques to do that? It looks like a religion. It's a community of spiritual practitioners doing inner work and having significant experiences and then coming together to share them. Like, so actually, yes, if we do accept the case that the inner state is a thing that needs to be refined and developed in an individual, again, way better when you do it in community, right? And
Yeah.
actually, a religion is straight up just a community of practice where they agree on some ideas, they agree on some metaphysics, they agree on practices that help them do that, and they sustain that over time. So that's one really important point, is like the religion is the internal example of what we've been speaking about, the weaving between individual and community. Like that's what religion serves. The problem, this is the activist problem too. If you're not extremely confident and rooted in yourself and your way, the way you'll arguably incorrectly get some of that confidence back is to point at other people and be like, I'm way better than you though. Like, look at how much you suck. Oh, you're doing this way wrong. And that's an ineffective way to get core confidence. I don't think it actually ever does it, even if it makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. This is one of the things that organized religion has done a terrible job of, because they've swung so far of being extremely insecure that they do conversion therapies and they do oppressive, like, you better fucking believe this so that I can prove to myself that it's the correct way of viewing things.
Yeah.
Super toxic, super toxic. And the third point is also why I think organized religion deserves its place kind of lower down the ladder, is it makes no room for emergence. It's not a living ecology, it's not a living ecosystem. It almost inevitably skews to dogma and just dogmatic orientations. And this was the entire idea of why the phoenix was used as a symbol. Actually, if anything we're going to make is going to be effective, baked into its very DNA has to be the acceptance of, well, there may come a time where we just need to burn this whole thing down and reinvent it. But almost no one does that. Like, there are very few systems who are willing to continually reinvent themselves to keep up with what's needed, right? Because like, this is the whole thing about discovering psychotexts, developing the ecology of practices, is like, you are constantly changing. The world is constantly changing. The collective is constantly changing. If anything you make is not adaptable enough for that continued evolutionary change, it's just going to fail. And this is again why this stance isn't solely just like anarchy and just burn it all down, but it's like no system we have right now has in its DNA the willingness or even ability to fundamentally change how it operates. Like, the financial system does not do that. The industrial system does not do that. willingly. It does it by force or by regulation. Yeah, even, even something like science, which science does have in its DNA the willingness to change. That's actually kind of the whole point. What's the best thing we can prove right now? And once I can prove something better, okay, you're supposed to update around that.
Yeah.
But actually, science is also skewing in this dogmatic leaning now, where it's actually just like, this is sacred
Mm.
truth, this is exactly how it is, and this is how it's going to be forever. Yeah, and so that archetype of the phoenix just continually burning down, letting go of the identity, letting go of the system, the way of being, and then building it back up with the wisdom and the love and the success that it had. This is also why the political stuff is such an absolute mess, because conservatism, like being conservative, actually recognizing, hey, we've got some stuff that's actually working, let's not break that while we build something new, is a really important stance, right? Let's just not change for the sake of change. Let's change for the sake of evolution, like an improved, refined expression. And at the same time, like liberalism, actually there's probably something we could be doing better, right? We could find new ways, is equally as important. Like they're two sides of the exact same thing. They're absolutely
Mm.
fundamental.
Yeah.
And together, like the friction between let's explore the new while keeping the wisdom of the past, that friction is the evolutionary process in
Mm.
collective systems. And it's leaning into that. And this is why, again, there's absolutely no separation, because you won't change because you're locked into your identities and the ways of being and the relationships that you have. And it holds you back, it stagnates you. And the collective does the exact same thing. If it's unwilling to update as fast as evolution wants to go, and given the fact that, again, humans are super cool, that we have self-awareness, that we can think about ourselves and our process, the consciousness can actually accelerate this process significantly faster than any system is set up to go right now. And so, yeah, we land inevitably, as always, back at that fundamental question of, what does something in the world that is up for this task of such sustained, rapid evolution actually look like? What are the tools that are flexible enough that can do that? Also brings us back to DAOs, right? Where the
Mm.
entire collective can surface wisdom and insight and vote immediately to change the entirety of itself.
Yeah.
Like that like building the things in yourself, the ecology of practices, and building the tools and systems to exist within that are actually able to evolve as fast as we need them to. And there's very little that does that right now, like just very little. And yeah, I
Mm.
mean, again, what an awesome fucking challenge. Build systems that can evolve as fast as life wants to evolve.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that was beautiful. So, yeah, so the religion of tomorrow would not be religion in the way we see it today. It
Yeah,
would
exactly.
actually be an evolving ecology of practices that doesn't look the same in 5 years as it does today. And every year is going to look almost entirely different. And same for organizations, it sounds like, and same for politics and government and economics and all of this stuff. And yeah, something I wanted to hit on as well is the balance between this and the map is not the territory, because I think that is also extremely important. So we talk about anti-fragile politics and governments and all of this stuff, and how do we make all these anti-fragile, how do we create the systems, and how do we create an anti-fragile religion that is based on the psychotechnologies of creating meaning.
Yep.
And I think this relates back to the point that we talked about earlier, which is it's not all through the mind. It's not all cognitive. and you can't arrive at all this stuff cognitively. And so I think there needs to be a constant reminder of like, yo, the map is not the territory, bro. The map is not the territory. Like, these systems are elaborate, but oh yeah, this was a very good point as well that I wanted to bring up. How do we create the systems? What does it look like in process? And where I have gone and I've started to realize that this is not the way is you don't just map everything. You don't just put everything on the computer and try to map it all and try to create the perfect system. It's like, no, you have to see the system and work with the system as it's moving and as it's going, and rather than trying to map the perfect system online, like on some digital tool, and like here how is everything is interacting with each other. And it's like, the fact that it's a map, the map is not the territory. Everyone's heard that, but what is that? How does that translate into everyday life with creating these systems? And it's like, we have a fun with DAOs. This is like a fundamental building block. It's like, here's this new system. Don't try to map the perfect system and just let it be. This is an ever evolving system. So do something and see if it changes the system in a direction that you want to change it in. If it doesn't, do something else and see if that thing changes like a high quality leverage point for the thing that you're trying to change. And you're always just like doing things and then seeing if there's how the system responds. You do this thing, how does the system respond? You do this thing, how does the system respond? And
Yep.
Daniel Wall talks about this a lot, and I'm excited to dive into his stuff around this, but he talks about how to create a regenerative world. And he's like, it's not always to create the perfect map of what is a regenerative. He talks a lot about questions and answers. We're not trying to create an answer with Phoenix culture, with DAOs, with all. We're not trying to create the perfect system here. We're just saying, here's the system that we have right now. Let's ask better questions. How is the system going to allow us to ask better questions, more refined questions, get deeper at the core of this, and continually evolve? And I bet you have some points on this as well, but like I feel like that is the process of creating the systems. Isn't mapping. It's, you can map if you want. Mapping is valuable, but it's like, do something, see how the system reacts. And why did it react that way? What caused it to react that way? It's not linear. What non-linear mechanism caused this system to react this way? How can I try to figure out what this actually is, knowing that I will never perfectly map it?
Wow, this is so good. This is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are several things here. The open-ended questions are probably the only way forward. Because what I mean by that is, yeah, there's a way to thread this right into the map is not the territory. Everything's constantly evolving. Like, it's not like you can say, oh, a year from now it'll be different. I mean, it's different right now. Like, you just changed by the end of this sentence. The minute anything is codified and solidified, it's already outdated. Maybe not by a lot, but sometimes actually significantly. As we're seeing again, stuff with climate change, this stuff has a long lag time, right? And if it's not constantly updated enough, this is the problem that religion is running into, right? None of the sacred texts are allowed to be updated. Therefore, they're extremely outdated, extremely outdated. And we're running up against that. Same thing with financial systems, same thing with ways of producing materials. Like, just, yeah, the minute it becomes solidified, it's already outdated. It's a really important point. And that to me is the map is not the territory, right? It can be helpful as broad generalizations. Like, this is kind of the region, but it's going to look way fucking different on the ground. Yeah, it's absolutely essential.
And it goes to how much time, what's the ratio of time that you're mapping versus testing versus that. I think that could relate as well.
Yeah, and this is, you also spoke to essentially the evolutionary process. Like, 50, 100, a bajillion, like minor adjustments. This is actually what survival of the fittest meant, right? It didn't mean strongest. It meant what is most suited to the environment right now. What internal disposition of a being is best mapped to the current context. And if one or a few like rose above the rest, that was immediately selected for, and then it did it again. And it's this constant like
Yeah.
yeah, exploration and synthesis. I mean, like a giraffe is an example. Like eventually it just got to the point where long necks were favored for. It's not like giraffes always had long necks, right? It was just a synthesis process. This is the exact stuff. This is why the open-ended questions are so important, because it's not what is the answer right now, but what is a question that orients me continuously in each moment, because I'm now dealing with a new thing. How do I best express my truth? That question never ends, right? That question never ends. How do I get into alignment with the collective? That question never ends because it's not time bound. It's where am I right now? Where am I out of alignment? How can I get there? And yeah, the open-ended questions are absolutely essential because they can also actually avoid the stagnation thing, because I'm not looking for an answer that I can write down and lock in forever.
Yeah.
It's a continual asking. And because of that, it's a continual listening for the response. I just actually put out a post like 2 days ago, just talking about like the pace of life. Like life is the archetypal genius. Nature is the archetypal genius. It does literally everything without effort, right on time, right when it needs to. And the thing is, like, if you're moving slower than the pace, like if you're actively resisting, if you're held back, if you're stagnant, if you're depressed, and you're moving slower, whenever you do start to enact the answer's already outdated. Life has moved way beyond that at that point. You're already behind the flow of the river, right? So you can't move slower. You also can't move faster, because if you move faster, the emergence hasn't actually happened. So you're just making a ridiculously narrow guess that could be in the entirely wrong direction, right? So there's actually this slowing down and listening. This is the intrinsic motivation thing. Ask the question and listen for the response. Listen really deeply for the response. And I mean, it will come. It will come as a thought, a memory, a feeling, a sensation. It also depends on the quality of your question. But that is yeah, this actually also invites a kind of metaphysics, right? But I would definitely argue like, yeah, the task at hand, we've laid out this entire conversation. We've got some big things to tackle. But I mean, part of it, this is actually, again, where individual internal material can come up. And actually, part of the answer is going to be slowing the fuck down. Like, slow down significantly, because, man, not doing things that are negative is just as good as doing things that are positive, right? Subtracting, this is basic algebra, right? Subtracting a negative is a positive, and adding a positive is also a positive, right? And man, it's difficult to sit with, but like, actually, the vast majority of the way our lives run right now are probably actively harmful. They're actively harmful to yourself, to others, to the biosphere. And if you just slow down, stopped constantly needing new things, constantly just buying stuff, like, okay, you're actually taking a significant step. And then this goes back to the intrinsic motivation. Like, if you do accept the argument that if everyone operated from intrinsic motivation, it'd be a really good thing, you have to fucking listen and be able to notice what that is. Like, what is actually being called to? What am I being summoned to do, like, right now? And having the courage to do that, because it might be entire career changes, it might be moving countries, it might be contributing to a collective. But yeah, I do think part of the answer will be how, actually, this is an open-ended question. Like, am I in alignment with the pace of life right now? Always is an open question, because you might get an answer. You might be like, wow, that's a big ask. That's a lot. And you might like twiddle your thumbs on it for a while. But that's the slowing down part. That's the internal resistance. Like, and this is why the cultivation of the individual is just so essential. Can you cultivate the courage and confidence in yourself to immediately begin in good faith and to the best of your ability, enacting what the fuck life asks you to do at that moment, where the river of life is taking you? Because forcing it, right, too fast, out of alignment, probably wrong in several ways. Too slow, like not feeling like you can, or trying to resist taking the big leap, too slow, man, too slow. And now you're behind the process. And you feel that. Again, your nervous system, this ancient fucking technology, will tell you forcing, like going too fast, is anxiety. Like, you feel like you have to do everything. You feel like you're forcing everything, because you are. Because you literally are. You're forcing everything because you're not listening. You're not in the river. And again, too slow, depression, stagnation, just lethargic moods. Like, just, you're too slow, man. Have the courage, support yourself, steward yourself. And then again, like, all rivers, all individual rivers lead back to the ocean, and you show up as part of this seamless, necessary part of this vast collective, doing exactly what it needs to do without effort, right on time.
Wow, beautiful. The slow down thing. There's some good stuff there. Because we live in this culture where it's this entire edifice of do more, be more productive, be more efficient. That's like the dominant way that we grow up as a culture. That's how I grew up. You got to go to college and get a job and grind it out and make as much money as possible. Like, everyone has experienced this. And I think there's this idea that slowing down means watching TV and binging on Netflix and smoking weed and drinking. That's not slowing down. I feel like that's why slowing down has been vilified.
Yeah.
I can't slow down. I'm not getting ahead in life. I'm not surviving. I'm slowing down. I'm not getting ahead on my survival, But it's like slowing down is not just hedonism. Hedonism and slowing down is not the same thing. And so I think it's really hard to decouple doing from being. And in terms of slowing down may mean meditating, but it's not meditation as I need to do an action of meditation and I need to put meditation on my to-do list and do more. It's like, no, meditation is slowing down into a state of being. And it could almost be like you could be strategic about slowing down. It's like, yes, I'm like planning slowing down, but it's not me doing anything. It's me realizing that I need to slow down. How do I slow down? Here are an ecology of practices to get into a state of being where I slow down. And that's what's been coming up a lot for me. It's like, I need to slow down, but slowing down does not mean hedonism. Slowing down is a deliberate practice. It's a deliberate, not action, but it's deliberate. It's a deliberate slowing down. It's not just, I'm just going to let the wheels turn until they come to a stop and I'm just not going to do anything. I think there's some very subtle distinctions there that I'm still making in my own life as well. And yeah, there were two other things I wanted to bring up as you were speaking. One was a point a little bit earlier was what we're doing is very conceptual and systemic, and there's a lot of moving parts. And I've been sensing, I sense one way of framing what you're doing with Phoenix culture and what DAOs are is not necessarily DAOs, but the Phoenix culture and the meaning crisis and the ecology of practices is like is it's providing an intellectual scaffold for spirituality. Because right now, spirituality is all slow down, be breath work, meditation. It's all fragmented, it's just like, just do these practices and you'll experience oneness. And it's like, well, where's like every like sage has said the mind is a great tool and a bad master, but we're not even using the mind as a tool. It's like, all right, I have this sense that the people that understand that don't use the mind. It's like, you understand, you get it. I've been trying to reconcile this and I've been having a hard time recently, but it's like, you go deep into these body-based somatic practices that help you embody the state of being, and you listen to your intuition and you feel into what do I want to do right now somatically, not cognitively. What do I want to do? What is my body telling me that I want to do? What is my soul telling me that I want to do? And you do that thing, but then there's no like intellectual scaffold to back that up. It's like, you don't want to start on your mind in your mind, because that just creates more problems. And we've been talking about those in this whole episode. If you start from the mind, it creates these 3 dark traits that you mentioned. And like this all arises from the mind. The problem is, how do we use the mind after coming from the heart? After coming from this, how do we build the intellectual scaffold? I think that's maybe how, and one way of framing the Phoenix culture, that's how I personally see the Phoenix culture, is like, it is like this, it's like this scaffold that once you go through these heart-based practices, here's the foundation, and here's how you can root yourself again in the holistic ecology of your life. And that's been on my mind a lot. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up was the open-ended question. So there's this thing that was coming up for me around context. So the evolutionary process, it's like, how do I best fit to the environment? If I best fit to the environment, then I will evolve. And what's been coming up for me is like, I want to build a successful career. Well, you can think of your career in terms of, how do I best fit into the environment of making money? But that's not going to create fulfillment. You are evolving in the context of how to more effectively make money. And the same thing with like the Hollywood thing, the industrial economy, all of these different things. There is an environment right now, and we can evolve and find the best way to evolve and be successful in that environment. But then it just leads to the ends justify the means, and narcissism and all of this stuff. And so there's something that I feel like is really important to bring up, is like, the evolutionary process that we're talking about isn't just optimization for what's already there. It's optimization of the environment as well as what we're optimizing for. Or it's like, as we're going through this process, it's not just that we're fitting to the environment, because like, it's unfulfilling to just fit into whatever environment is already there and to optimize for that. Our questions is like, the questions are going to evolve. The environment and what we're optimizing for is going to evolve. Our like ontological understanding of the world is going to evolve. That doesn't even say the same. And so that's something that I felt like I needed to be brought up. And yeah, any thoughts? Oh. And then I think this was starting to feel like it's wrapping up, but I thought I mentioned that too.
Yeah, one of the ways Phoenix culture lands for me is like, it's a home. It's a home for people who want to do this stuff, because man, if you start trying to do this right now, like, you're an outcast. Like, you're the black sheep. You're the hippie woo woo. You're the green tier nonsense. Like, you actually just get ostracized. You get completely ostracized from the group, from like good faith explorations of like, I actually love humanity. I want this thing to continue. I want to find a way to do that. It demonstrates in a way just how kind of off the beaten track we've gotten here as a collective.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, a big part of it was just like, yo, you are safe here. Like people will actually look at you and want to hear more, not just like nod and say, yeah, okay, that sounds great. Like
Mm.
part of it is a home. And like another part of it is an opportunity to actually start doing this stuff if you feel called. Because again, a lot of the spaces just don't exist right now. And like, yeah, we have been talking quite abstract. Like on the site, I have kind of 5 core physical things that are starting to come together that I think are like the first initial explorations, like the academy to actually like a Hogwarts, like a community of practice to do the inner part of it. The institute, which is like, look, if you actually want to mess around, go into the dark jungle of trying to figure out what some of these tools, systems, techniques look like, well, here are other people who want to do that as well. There are 2 kind of experience driven ones, like a essentially a retreat and a fellowship, where it's like, look, if you actually want to do the embodied example of what we've been talking about, there's a space for you there as well. And then of course there's an entire one of just the emergent, like what does the collective think that this thing can best serve? Vote for that, bring that idea up, and we can do it. Again, like it's just a communal approval process. Like it's this is the thing about DAOs. They're largely permissionless. Just show up with your best idea and see if it resonates. So yeah, like right now is the process of starting to ground this in the world, right? Like I do. Yeah, the container stuff comes up a lot, right? That's actually why even in the logo, like the Phoenix is just this wrapped around thing. Like it's the warm hug where you can come and do this, because it's not straightforward. The things we actually have to build are not there. They don't exist. That's hard. And then again, this individual process is not easy, right? Letting go, like identity level transformation is not easy. It can be very difficult. It feels like dying. It feels like dying. And it becomes exponentially harder. I'll use the river example again, because I think we've used it before on some separate conversations. Trying to do this already difficult work in an environment and a context that is not conducive for it is like trying to walk against river, like trying to walk against the flow. It is so arduous. But the opposite is also true. If you are nested within an environment and a context that is deeply in favor of it, you actually turn around and like float on your back down the river. You get carried by the thing. This is also why I say this stuff, yeah, there is like a non-doing effortlessness part of this, because it's so natural. It's your natural state. Like, yeah, coming together in people, being really engaged in work, rediscovering play and purpose. This is another kind of small point of like, this is really hard for people to wrap their heads around. It's like, the solution, at least in my opinion, any viable solution to the problems that we've already brought up has to include play and slowness and joy and fun. Like if
Yeah.
it actually doesn't, if it's not exciting to you, this is the intrinsic motivation thing. Games are the most intrinsically motivating thing I think humans have access to. If it's not gamified, if it's not fun, if it's not playful, it's not the answer. So in a way, it becomes this just virtuous process where, it's easy to talk about this stuff like it's such a slog. But I mean, imagine just being in a wonderful community of people you deeply respected and who deeply respect you, doing some of the coolest shit that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Like that to me is what this is at least trying to be. But yeah, at the same time, you can also take the framing of like, yeah, but I mean, what game would you rather play than stewarding humanity through a ridiculously challenging phase transition?
Wow.
Like, yeah. I think just one last like little nod, because I think you're absolutely correct on the idea that slowness is not sloth. That's entirely, and actually that framing only comes from the highly myopically output focused framing, where
Yep.
it's also came from organized religion, right? Idle hands do the devil's work. Even HP's doing stuff. I mean, that's not going to fly. Because the other way we've spoken about this separately is, if you did the one right thing, in your day, like the one thing that was most essential, you could only do that one thing the entire day and feel deeply fulfilled, deeply perfect. You did what you needed to. Alternatively, if you avoided that one thing, because it might not always be easy or comfortable, and you did 1,000 other things, it still wouldn't feel like it's enough.
Yep.
And so this bubbles up the stack for us again with, well, imagine if a collective did the single most significant thing that they could, the information that they had at that moment, that would be enough. And if that just became a feedback loop, what do we need? How do we align with life? How do we go through this transition? Listen for the answer, slow the fuck down and listen. Because this is how, when I heard you say it, it came up for me. It's like being in a conversation with someone and asking for advice and never stop talking. Like you just
Ah,
never. And if you're just always doing stuff, if you're always doing stuff and looking somehow for the answer, you're never listening. Like, stop fucking talking.
yeah.
Stop fucking doing stuff. Stop busying yourself. Listen for the answer and then have the courage to act on it. And
Mm.
like it can be that simple. Changing your
'Cause-
entire life can be that simple.
yeah. Because if you're watching Netflix, you're not listening. If you're drinking, smoking weed, you're not listening. You may not
Yep.
be doing much, but you're not listening, you know? And yeah, what does it look like to listen? That's a question to ponder.
It's a good open-ended question.
Yeah.
How do I listen more? Right? How do I
There you
listen
go.
more? And that, yeah, increase your sensitivity, make
Mhm.
space. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Look for the signals.
There you go. Yeah, one last point to sum up that I would, it's very open-ended, so there's not going to be an answer, but is I've been thinking about
Good.
this. I've been thinking about two things. One, to be a part of a decentralized organization, a collective. I spoke with you previously about this as well, and it's like I have this idea in my mind right now that like fulfillment arises from creation. And if I didn't create this, then how am I going to be fulfilled? But as I'm speaking with you, it's like, but you can also, I think it relates to the myth of the self-made man too, because it's like,
Yep. 100%.
because it's like I can create while also at the same time being part of a larger system. I can satisfy that creative desire and build things in the world. It's almost like you were speaking about this in your video on the uncopyright stuff and on this. It's like maybe it's just an ego drive, to want to create and to want to be the one at the top of your creation. And this is what I brought into the world. Look how great it is. Look how great this organization is that I created. And I'm
Yep.
struggling with that right now because I'm trying to create some projects. I'm trying to burst some projects in the world. And it's like, but then what if I just make this a part of a decentralized organization? Am I going to get the same level of fulfillment than if I spearhead it and I become the face at the head of the project? And the two things that I have been thinking about is one that I don't even think that really needs a response. I think I just brought up the answer as I was speaking was like, you don't need to be this spear. You don't need to spearhead anything. If you are part of all seemingly infinite amount of systems right now. So just to be a part of a larger
Yep.
system and to create within that is no different. But two is if you're creating a DAO, how do you, and again, there's no solid answer and it's super open-ended, but but how do you steer the collective intelligence of the DAO so that's, let's say you let people in and they're embodying a deeply emotionally like stage orange blue way of seeing the world. How do you make sure that doesn't steer the collective intelligence in a way that was not the original intention of what you created, and that it doesn't just turn into this trash DAO that doesn't accomplish what you want, because it's
Yep.
very challenging. It's a very challenging thing to do. I'm curious where your head is around that steering. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first off, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on how you do governance stuff, but this is actually the whole point. The idea that a single person could take a collective intelligence off track is incorrect, right? Because it would have to be voted on
Yeah.
before it could be done, right? And if the group senses that it's out of line, then it won't pass. Then it won't pass. And so they won't actually be able to do it. And the other thing is, well, if the group actually does say yes to this,
It's the group.
that's very strong signal. That's very strong signal, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's it's a surrendered release where it's like, look, if I disagree with this personally, I'm going to voice that and I'll take someone to task, right? Just because you share something doesn't mean it's going to be immediately accepted,
Mm.
but it means you're sending out a signal. And so there's this surrendered aspect to it where it's like, wow, if the people who feel called with this are all signaling yes, who am I to then just put my foot down and be like, well, nah, fuck you, no. Right. And that's a that's also material that can be taken into an individual process, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I actually just want to be the face? Right.
Mm.
Because there's a difference. This is also the fluid between the individual and the collective. Like, to be an effective part of a collective, you need to be able to lead, right? Because if it, for whatever reason, comes up that you actually need to take some action, or you're part of a smaller nested group where you are actually um, like the steward or the organizer of it, you better be able to step into that position. But there is a difference between leading and like just solely wanting to be the leader,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And
That's
this is again where you get the whole dark triad stuff, where actually people who want that, I would actually be wary of people who want to be the face of something.
mm.
Like, just why? What is another way to say this? I guess is it's probably rare if it's coming from intrinsic motivation that you would want to be just the sole power of authority in
Yeah.
that thing and get all the recognition for it. Because yeah, this is the self-made man argument. You know, whatever you come up with, you have no idea where the thought came from. You didn't create the language that you used to
Yeah.
express it. You didn't create any of the tools that you used to bring that into the world, and to lay ownership of that is
Yeah.
kind of weak. But yeah, both of those, both of those fucking amazing open
Wow.
questions.
That's amazing. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I guess how I was thinking about it was more like in the initial phases when you're starting it. If it's only made of 5 people, if 3 of those people are not in alignment with the core values of that, that could steer the entire thing off track, you know? So it's like, it was more like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Once the collective intelligence is already there, it's going to run and it's going to govern itself. But the challenge is, how do you make sure, how do you build the collective intelligence in the first place that is completely and utterly aligned with these values and these core
Yep.
things? Yeah. And it sounds like, as I was speaking, or as I was listening to you speak, it was like, that's where the leadership role comes in. That's what it's sounding like. It's like, your job as a leader is to build the manifesto and the values, and to steward, to go from zero to collective intelligence. And then once the collective intelligence is there, then it's like, it just runs itself. Then you take yourself out of it. You're not the face of it. And perhaps that is the role of the leader.
Yeah, like the two tangible answers I've kind of seen and am leaning towards right now is actually c- clarifying values. Like, what are the values of this initiative? Can, like,
Mm.
essentially open-ended aims, right? Let's try to embody as much as we can these things. And again, there's that delicate balance between dogmatic, like commandment style, you better fucking do
Mm.
this, and let's try to aim for this. But if people in good faith can try to do that, you can have some confidence that it'll actually take that in the right direction. And then there's a more like technical approach to this, because particularly if you're coming into a group that has funds, like that has the ability to materialize stuff in the world, well, there are mechanisms like actually you get to choose how you break this down. Like sometimes it can just be equity based. If you put the most money in, your vote carries the highest weight. And so even if 5 other people voted no and you vote yes, because your weight is just so much more significant, it still passes. That's a thing that also invites the trap of pay to play, right? People with the most money get to do whatever the fuck they want, which is not ideal. So like, yeah, I've seen projects starting to separate or delineate equity and voice tokens, or just voice. So like, I don't know, I've seen ones where you can get more voice the more equity you've put in, but it's not linear. It's not a linear scale. So like you might have 10 times the amount of money put in, but only 3 times the amount of weight to your vote. Something like that is an option.
Yeah.
You only start earning voice tokens after contributing multiple times.
Mm.
So there are mechanisms to balance that. And I mean, this is again like this is the thing. Figuring this out is the
Yes.
whole thing right now. Like this is the stuff that needs to be built. And yeah, so like it's an open-ended question, starting to have some more clear ideas of what bringing that to life actually looks like. And now the task is just okay, like let's go build it.
Yeah.
Let's go actually do this. And that is exactly where the entire project is at right now.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a good ending point. It's the creative evolutionary process again. Here's the good starting
Yep.
point. Create values, figure out if you contribute, you get, and you people think that you're contributing in a way that aligns with these values, you get more voting points. And then we go and do the iteration process from there and we iterate on it.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Just be
yeah.
willing to change.
There you go. Well, I appreciate, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure. And
Dude, always.